Civil society group on schooling matters, Equal Education, says proposed changes to the Department of Basic Education on the norms and standards for public school infrastructure are drastic and unacceptable. EE says the draft amendments published in the Government Gazette on the 10th of June are undermining the right to basic education, and if the amendments go through, schools will fall apart with no accountability. So according to Equal Education, the department wants to totally remove the deadline set for the government to get rid of pit latrines and provide basics such as water, electricity, classrooms, fences and libraries. Meanwhile, the Portfolio Committee on Education has extended the deadline for submissions on the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill to the 15th of August. Equal Education Head of Research and Development, Roné McFarlane, joins us now to talk about a couple of the issues that are arising out of this. Roné, thanks for your time. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Leanne, and good morning to your viewers.
So I read the introduction about taking away timelines to, basically give basic needs to classrooms. But let me leave it to you to explain it a bit further. What are those main issues that are concerning equal education on the proposed amendments to the norms and standards for public school infrastructure?
Yes, so first to say, Leanne, that the norms and standards for school infrastructure isn't something that came about easily. Equal Education had been campaigning about school infrastructure since 2008, and our members realized that we're going to be in this fight for school infrastructure forever if there isn't some rule that at the very least says this is the basic infrastructure that every school must have. And so our members started campaigning for the Department of Basic Education to pass a law that sets that out. This is what every school in South Africa must have. And finally, in 2013, the minister published that law, and that is the norms and standards for school infrastructure. Now, one of the important elements of the law is that it actually sets deadlines by when certain things must be delivered to all public schools. So the first deadline was in 2016, when all schools had to have some access to electricity, water, and toilets. And then the second deadline was in 2020, where all schools then actually had to have sufficient access to electricity, water, and also importantly, classrooms and fencing. And the next deadline is coming up in 2023, when all schools have to have access to libraries. Now, the amendments that the department is proposing is completely taking away those deadlines, and it is replacing it with a vague reference to the National Development Plan. The department says it's just trying to align timelines with each other, but the deadlines in the norms and standards, the existing deadlines, anyway take us to 2030. So it's not clear what realignment is necessary. And our view is that that's actually not the real reason. The department is realizing that it can't meet these deadlines and therefore is trying to take that accountability out of the law. Now, the important thing we must remember here is that those deadlines don't just set deadlines for the department. They also provide entitlements to learners. That means today, as we are speaking, every learner has a right to have electricity in their classroom, to have decent toilets, to have water, and to have enough classrooms. Now, the proposed amendments actually means that the department is saying, we're going to take away that entitlement that learners have today, and we're going to postpone it to some indefinite date in the future. And I'm sure we can all agree that that is just completely unacceptable.
Well, I mean, it's certainly...
And we can't let the department get away with that.
It certainly is. And the reason given behind all of this that we heard from the minister is that they basically want to align plans, or its plans, with the National Development Plan. And is that a good enough reason?
Yeah, so as I said, the deadlines as they currently stand in the norms and standards already take us to 2030. So the first deadline was 2016. The second deadline is 2020. Then the upcoming deadline is 2023. And the final deadline by when schools must essentially have all basic infrastructure, things like walls and so on, is 2030. So our view is that those timelines are already aligned, number one. Number two, the NDP doesn't carry the same legal weight as the norms and standards. The norms and standards is a law. The NDP is more of a policy statement. And while it's an important document, who knows if a new government comes in and, moves things around. It doesn't require the same type of public participation and processes that changing a law requires. So that's the first thing to say. And then the other thing to say is, as I said, we're talking here about taking away learners' rights. So it's hard to understand how aligning vague timelines in the sector that isn't even clearly defined could be a justification for such a drastic step.
Yeah. So let's go back. I mean, you've alluded to it. What happened already? I mean, this is years in the making. But if we look at 2018. The court sought to remove the so-called escape clause that says schools can only be fixed if there is cooperation and resources from other government actors such as Treasury and municipalities. So basically what the court declared was the clause unlawful and invalid. One would actually think that the government should lead with change to fulfill its obligation. But what do you think is the reason that makes government appear as if it's so resistant?
Yeah, that's something that's, really difficult. I'd say that one challenge is that the challenge isn't just the basic education department. There are various departments that are a problem here. We need to be holding all of these departments accountable. A department like Public Works must come through, ESCOM must come through when it comes to providing electricity for schools. So those are important challenges in the sector. But what the court said in 2018 is the department does have a responsibility to bring all those guys to the table and to make sure that schools get built. It cannot be that the law says, well, if these other stakeholders don't come to the party, then sorry, we're going to be behind with building schools. As you say, it really should be that the department should be leading the charge to make sure that the conditions that enable learning are in place. And it's really mind-blowing that an organization like Equal Education has had to take them to court to emphasize that that is actually their duty.
Yeah.
And it's really a problem of not wanting to take accountability.
Indeed.
There's a problem with not implementing fast enough. There's a problem with some private actors that are involved in building schools that also unnecessarily delay school construction. There's implementing agents and contractors who are involved, and the state is not doing enough to hold them accountable and to make sure that they deliver. And so it really requires us to keep the pressure on the department to meet these targets. And removing these targets from the law really just weakens that position. So we have to fight it.
All right, so that's that issue. I want to talk very briefly, we've only got about 3 minutes to news. The BELA bill is proposing the biggest changes to the South African Schools Act in the past decade. I want to get your views on it, on some of the proposals in the bill. I like compulsory schooling from grade R. We've been speaking about that for a while. Language policies and curriculums as well. Some political parties have said the department is trying to impose draconian rules to take power away from schools and SGBs. And there's also this idea of making alcohol available for school fundraising events. That's also another very, very big sticking point that people are talking to. Talk to us about your equal education stance on some of these changes. I know that the deadline's been moved out to August, but perhaps you can give us your views.
So Leanne, as you say, it's really important changes to the South African Schools Act, and these amendments don't come around every year. So it is quite an important moment in education law, and a lot of the proposals are quite controversial. You spoke about the sale of alcohol in schools. This is something that Equal Education strongly opposes. We don't understand how the Department of Education could justify an amendment like that. They say it's to help with fundraising activities, but the provision allows for the sale and consumption of alcohol at school activities where learners are present. The only requirement is that it must be after school hours. And we just think that it's completely unacceptable. We know the role that alcohol plays in our societies and the dangers that come with irresponsible alcohol consumption. And the school must be a place that provides an alternative environment to that, as opposed to just one more environment where learners encounter these challenges. And members of Equal Education have explained to us that they will not feel safe at an activity where adults are freely consuming alcohol, and there's simply no guarantee, as we've been painfully reminded over the last couple of weeks, that even if there are regulations in place, that these regulations will actually be implemented at their school.
Yeah.
You also mentioned school governing body powers. I'll talk about that briefly. So the law now says that in terms of language and admissions policies, provincial education departments need to review a school's policy. And we feel that that makes a lot of sense. It's a school that belongs to government, and so government has an entitlement to make sure that the policies of the school are fair. That doesn't mean it's taking away powers from school governing bodies. They are still the ones that are primarily responsible for formulating those policies.
All right, we've got to leave it there, Roné, but I know that we still got a bit of a time leading up to the public comments that are extended until the August the 16th. It's a vital document to read, and people really should make the time. But that was Equal Education Head of Research and Development, Roné McFarlane, discussing matters related to basic education. So the deadline, as I mentioned, for feedback on the proposed changes must be submitted to the Department of Education by the 10th of July 2022, while Parliament has extended the deadline for submissions on the BELA Bill to the 15th of August.